Yeah, hello, everybody. Good morning. It is July 26th, so I've dated the program. The year is 2021, and it is the bucket list. I'm Paul Collins, along with my wife, Nancy, who is my co host for the bucket list. Bucket list is designed for those people 50 and beyond, and those who have relatives 50 and beyond, so that we can get you to deal with some of the things that maybe you put off doing. In other words, what we used to call getting round to it. Remember one of those round things that had to it on it and round to it? Well, a lot of things we don't get round to it. We have talked, Nancy, on this bucket list show in the past about Medicare, Medicaid. We've talked about Social Security. We've talked about Internal Revenue Service, its history, and the history of the federal income tax, and a number of things of interest to a general audience, but gets to be more specific as you get older. Now,
Yeah.
you have probably heard me say that growing older is not for sissies. And you probably also heard me say that growing older is expensive, because I have here on the table in front of me my hearing aids. It's the second set that I've had. And the first ones, I think, were like $4,500 or something like that. And these, because technology has improved and one thing and another, $3,500. Had to have a new cell phone in order to operate those hearing aids, and the cell phone came in at about $450, one that would be capable of handling these hearing aids. So
you're talking about $4,000.
Oh, well, talking about a little over 4,000, yeah, altogether, just
Yeah.
because of this up here. Now, I can hear without the hearing aids. It's just not really distinct. It's a little muffled. But now, how did my hearing get messed up? It wasn't from loud music, because in my day, the music was mellow and it was all love songs for the most part, unless you were listening to Spike Lee. Some of you out there may remember Spike Lee, but and he was a crazy guy with his little band. But for the most part, they were love songs, and it was Bing Crosby. It was Vic Damone.
Dean Martin.
Dean Martin. Vic Damone sang On the Street Where You Live. And Dean Martin, of course, Frank Sinatra, etc. And the lady singers were likewise very mellow, and those were the hits of the 50s, and even over into the 60s. And the country music was very mellow. They were mostly all love songs, but the music got louder and became less discernible as far as hearing the words, and then people walking around with earbuds and an iPod, and they're listening to music very loud. And I told some of you in times past, and I think I mentioned it on the broadcast last week, Nancy, that the young guy that has his doctorate in audiology, 8 years beyond high school and a lot of clinical training that he has to do every year to maintain his Doctor of Audiology degree. Back 8 years ago or so, when I got my first set of hearing aids, he was new in practice, but he already had like 12 clinics. Now he has, 8 years later, 250 clinics at last count, because he knew as a young man what was going on with the hearing of his generation and the succeeding generations, that everybody was destroying their hearing. And when I say everybody, yeah, everybody's destroying their hearing because of listening to very loud music. Now, there are other sounds that we used to hear that were loud when I was a kid. We'd stand close to the railroad crossing and big steam locomotives would go by. They made a lot of noise, and especially if they blew their whistle. And then there was a lot of machinery that was loud. We didn't realize that riding a tractor could affect your hearing. Lawnmowers weren't very loud because they weren't motorized.
Yeah.
They were old reel type. You
That's
pushed them.
right. You push mowers.
Right. But there's always been sources of noise. However, now it's been accentuated and pinpointed with earbuds and iPods and loud music. Even when you go to churches, some churches, their music is very loud. They have like a band. They'll have 2 or 3 electric guitars. They'll have drums. They'll have just lots of noise. And that's sure different than the days of the pipe organ and the piano keyboard, baby grands and that sort of thing. So anyway, a lot of noise wherever you go. In fact, we've been invited to a church that we haven't attended because they said we'd have to wear earbuds, things
Hmm.
because
Ear protectors.
because the music is so loud. I'm not interested in it. To me, that's not church. I'm sorry. I just got to be honest with you and tell you. To me, that's not church. It's a big gathering. It's like a rock concert, and I've heard somebody even on Acts Media Group talk about the praise and that it was real, and well, maybe it is to him, but it's not to me. That's not my thing. Now, here's the thing about noise. I pointed out last week that loud music is now being held responsible by experts in the field for an increase in strokes.
Mm.
A stroke is a very serious thing. You'll have like a blood clot that hits a portion of the brain and can affect you physically, in your face, or in your arms, in your legs. It's very debilitating. A stroke is a serious business. Some of you younger ones who have older people in your family, like say 50 and beyond, and you don't know anything about strokes, I suggest you use your due diligence, go online, you're good at that, and Google it and read up on strokes. And you just might stop listening to some of that music that's so extremely loud.
Hmm.
I think the air conditioner just came on, didn't it? Or not?
I think so.
I can hear it in my earphones. I hope they're not hearing it on air. Anyway, uh, not only does loud music cause um, strokes, can cause strokes. Not all strokes are caused by loud music, obviously, but it is a contributing factor, and it's scientifically proven. Now, we've also discovered that um, loud music definitely affects the hearing, as we talked about earlier, because the audiology has become a huge science now. Doctors of audiology are doing things concerning human hearing and ears that someone who is a hearing aid technician is not equipped to do,
Hmm.
educationally and scientifically and so forth. So loud music is affecting the number of strokes. It's affecting the hearing aid industry, the ears of people. Uh, and Here's the last one that I'm going to talk about today in regarding hearing. It also is a contributing factor to early onset Alzheimer's.
Wow.
Yes, I read this past week in a very renowned old magazine that I've been a subscriber to for 43 years, and they had all the scientific evidence, all of the statistics, and early onset Alzheimer's can be sometimes caused by an excessive amount of loud music over extended period of time. Now, we know about Alzheimer's. Let's talk about your mama first, about Alzheimer's. I don't know how old she was when we first noticed it. Maybe, take a guess, 75?
Yeah, she may have been that.
I know we did not at first recognize Alzheimer's because your mom, whose name was Willie, but we called her Billy,
Hmm.
she was such a servant and such a wonderful hostess, that she was constantly, when you went to the home of your parents, they were constantly waiting on us, as we would say. She was always offering coffee and one thing and another, and she couldn't sit still. She was up and down a lot, just like you do. You're up and down all the time, and we didn't notice right off that there was anything going on mentally. But then after a while, it became very obvious because all of this behavior became accentuated, and she was into dementia and then into full-blown Alzheimer's, to the point where uh, she had to be in a nursing home and have special care in an Alzheimer's unit,
Yeah.
and then eventually died from the disease.
Hmm.
Alzheimer's does take life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my sister came down with Alzheimer's. We noticed the dementia when I was there to see her husband had passed away, my brother-in-law, and I'd preached his funeral. And then my sister, as a senior citizen, and was contacted by her first boyfriend, who was a widower. His wife had died. And so my sister and her first boyfriend became girlfriend-boyfriend again as senior citizens. It was a beautiful thing. Well, then the boyfriend passed away, and I had his funeral. At the time I had his funeral, I noticed my sister's behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a visit with her at her kitchen table. And I said, "Sis, you know what's happening to you?" She nodded yes. I said, "You have one child, your son. I suggest that now, while you're able, you put everything in his name and make certain that all of your legal bases are covered, because the time will come when you'll not be able to care for yourself." And she agreed,
Mm-hmm.
and she did it. It wasn't long after that until my nephew called very apologetically and said that he had placed my sister, his mom, in a nursing home. And I said, "Don't apologize for it." I said, I'm relieved.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thankful, because I didn't want her hurting herself. Uh, and he lived on a major highway, and I didn't want her wandering out on the highway being hit by a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a big pond or a small lake on the property. I didn't want her to walk out there and fall in that and drown. And
Yeah.
also, at one time before he got her in the nursing home, she let something get on fire on the gas range. And luckily, it did not become a major problem, a
Mm-hmm.
major fire. But he was so apologetic, like, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I had to put Mom in the nursing home." I said, "Don't apologize. Thank you for taking care of my sister."
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we went to see her. and folks, you have to just be honest about this stuff. It was kind of cute. We walked in, and she's sitting there at a table, and she's folding very carefully paper and very intricately folding it. And she really wasn't paying any attention to us as we tried to visit with her. He acknowledged that we were talking to her, but she didn't really have a sense of who we were or what we were doing.
And that was okay.
That was okay.
That's okay.
And then later, her son was telling me, my nephew was telling me, now he was a city policeman at the time, and that he had stopped to see his mom. And of course, he had a thing over his badge, his name tag, with his last name on it. And he stood in the doorway of her room there in the nursing home and said, "You know who I am?" And she looked up and read his name on his uniform, and it was just his last name. She didn't, so it was obvious that she didn't know his first name. She didn't really know who he was.
And that's all right too.
That's all right. Then the last time we saw her, she had wandered into someone else's room and was sitting there in someone else's rocking chair with someone else's baby doll, and she was rocking that baby doll, and had no idea that we were even in the room, and that was just okay.
That sure is.
So, of course, she passed from the disease. Well, you have to learn how to deal with Alzheimer's, but you also need to learn some of the preventative measures you can take ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
They say that one of the hints that you could be subject to Alzheimer's is when you have trouble remembering names. Now, I remember hearing the old timers say, and then the younger timers and the real young timers say, "I'm good at remembering faces, but I have trouble remembering names."
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard that?
I probably have.
I've said it many times. "Oh, I can see their face,
Uh-huh.
but I can't recall their name."
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember hearing people say, "Well, I'm good with faces, but I'm not good with names."
Mm-hmm.
Well, frankly, when you reach the point that you have a little problem remembering names, that is a hint that if you don't do something about it, you are a candidate, at least a candidate. Now remember, not all candidates get elected. but you're at least a candidate for Alzheimer's. Now, when I developed a little problem, I noticed remembering names, not of people close to me or the neighbors or, my family, but movie stars or recording artists, that sort of thing. I thought, I'm going to do something about that. So I have, in my date book, I have a little pad, and any name that I've had trouble remembering, I write it in there. And periodically I'll go back and look at those. And sometimes I have trouble remembering a name, like there was a country western singer who's now deceased, they were talking about one of his hit songs, but they didn't use his name. And I was having trouble, remember, the other day, remembering his name. I flipped over in my little book of reminders. There was his name, and I said, here's his name. And now that name is stuck up here. I won't forget it again. So there are little techniques that you can use. If you have questions about any of this, I suggest that you do two things. Number one, go to axmediagroup.com, ACTS Media, MEDIA, group, GROUP.com. That's simple, axmediagroup.com. By the way, this show will be replayed, I'm sure, for a long time, many times, and be archived so that you can be armed about Alzheimer's, and you can be armed about strokes, and you can be armed about your hearing. So, axmediagroup.com. Also, if you want direct connection with me, with Nancy, it's DR, that's short for doctor, drpaulcollins.com. drpaulcollins.com. That's all the address that you need. Type it in. And through my website, you can send me an email, and then I will connect back with you with my email, and we'll get a conversation going by way of email. And then if it's necessary to talk beyond that, we will talk beyond that by phone or by text message, and maybe someday even in person. But it's drpaulcollins.com. Okay, Nancy, next week we have as our guest a very special lady. I want to promote it. I want you to be tuned in. She's about your size, and she's very young, maybe 35 at the most. She's a medical doctor, and she's very beautiful. I remember when the first medical doctor I knew was a man, and he was real big around and not very beautiful. He was a cigar smoker, and you had to walk up a long flight of wooden stairs to get to his office.
So if you couldn't make the stairs, you couldn't go see him.
That's right. But they made house calls in those days. They came with a little black bag, But when you got up there, there was a little bitty waiting room where you sat down. And when he opened the door, you walked in, he was there. That was it. He had an examination table and a roll top desk and a wooden chair that rolled around and would spin. That was it. And times have changed because now many ladies are in medicine, and our primary care physician, like I said, is a beautiful young woman, about 35 at the most, and her name is Jamie Durfee, Jamie Durfee, Durfey, Jamie Durfee. We love Jamie. Jamie loves us. And when I contacted her about a week ago or so about being on the show, reminding her, she said, I have it on my calendar. And I told her that we'd missed her. And she said, well, I missed you too, but not seeing you means that you're probably in good health, and be thankful. And we are. So anyway, we will have questions for her from you if you contact me through drpaulcollins.com with questions that you want to ask. Now, she will not give specific, definite, personal advice medically over the air.
Because she hasn't seen the people.
That's right, because you're not her patient, and she's not in person, and it's not telemedicine. But she'll be able to shed light on questions and issues in a general way that you can kind of go through then and do your due diligence, and you'll learn something. So, but also we're going to find out from her where she grew up, where she went to medical school, what she studied in medical school, about her internship time. We're going to find out some of the background behind being an MD.
And we also might talk with her about diet issues
Mm-hmm.
and fungus and yeast.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. If you have any kind of questions, just send them through drpaulcollins.com, and that'll guide Nancy and me in our interview time with Dr. Durfee. Now, on another matter, Nancy, we know that we talked about inflation a while back, and I mentioned early on in this broadcast that growing older is expensive. Well, let's point out that we've heard lots of people say, well, I'm on a fixed income. What do they mean by that? Well, it means that they don't have any way to get a raise in salary.
Mm-hmm.
It means they're probably retired. Now, some people say, well, you get a cost of living increase on your Social Security. Not forget it, folks. It's a joke. We can tell you it's a joke. It's way below the inflation marker, and it's not enough to cover the increase in what they charge us for Medicare Part B. So don't think that just because you are retired, you've got a free ride and everything's coming up roses. Not so. Your spendable income shrinks, not just annually now, but it's shrinking semi-annually, and it's shrinking quarterly. Now we're seeing it shrink month to month because of this kind of inflation that's going on that, for the most part, for some people, it's almost like hidden. They pull up to a gas pump, they put some gas in, and some people just aren't aware that they're spending about $1 a gallon more than they did just a short while back.
Mm-hmm.
So that has meant, in our case, major jump in our fuel cost.
Mm-hmm.
We did not get a raise to cover that. When we go to the grocery store, to the supermarket, our supermarket expenditures have gone up humongously, about over 25%,
Mm-hmm.
over 25%, and that's been recently. Now, we didn't get a raise in retirement to cover that. The list goes on and on and on about the inflation. I brought with me something I printed off from a man who's a lawyer and has a podcast and does a lot of writing, writes books, and he writes almost a daily e-letter, I call it, something that he puts out by email. And he writes in something that I printed off 3 or 4 days ago. He said, at a time when food prices are already rising aggressively, agricultural production in the United States is being absolutely devastated by a drought that many are calling the worst in American history. We know from the news, when you get behind the political news, then you see the real news. The political news gets to be so phony. I got to vent a little bit here. Whether it's the left or the right or the middle, everybody's playing their own game. The left says what they want to say. The right says what they want to say. The two never agree. The people that are supposed to be moderates, they're not really moderates. It's hard to find any real opinions that are based on real fact out there in the political marketplace. As an example, all of this stuff about to take a shot or not take a shot. Now, back when I was a kid, that meant take a shot of whiskey or not take a shot of whiskey. Now that has to do with the vaccine for COVID-19 and its variants. I'm sorry there's such a discussion on this. As recently as this morning, I had this thought. What if we had treated smallpox the same way we've been treating COVID?
I know, but see, here's the thing too. When we went overseas in the 50s, we had, I bet, 12 shots that we had to take. We had never, ever, ever, ever taken anything like that before. And I'll tell you what, those shots were painful, but that went away.
Well, they were painful to you. They probably wouldn't have been to me. because
Well,
you experience pain differently than I do.
I
But the
know,
point is,
but see, you've never had a cholera shot or a yellow fever shot or those kinds of shots that you needed at that time.
well, but when I was a little kid, we had diphtheria shots and we had smallpox vaccination. They
Yes.
scratched at you and you had to have a sore on it, a
Mhm.
scab. Smallpox was officially considered eradicated in 1988. In 1978 was the last known pox-generated smallpox.
Mhm.
Smallpox, they say, started in Africa among rodents and managed to move into humankind. Smallpox was devastating. There are some people in some cultures now who have pox-marked faces.
Yes.
They have all these scars on their
Mhm.
faces from smallpox.
Mhm.
Well, how did we get smallpox eradicated? Vaccination.
Yes.
Now they have in a lab samples of the smallpox. I hope they never let it loose because we have generations now who were not vaccinated against smallpox.
Mhm.
If they ever let that smallpox get loose, it'll be devastating.
Yeah.
So let's take about this COVID-19. Smallpox has been handled. Diphtheria has been handled. Polio, originally known as infantile paralysis, because originally it affected infants and children, then it started affecting adults. Now, COVID started with older adults and worked its way down to now it can affect children. Let's use some common sense, folks. They say follow the science, but they don't really follow the science. I've heard the discussions about masking or not the mask, and those who say, well, I'm not going to get a vaccine or a shot because they can't force me to do that. Well, when you went overseas to work, your folks to work in Saudi Arabia,
Mhm.
you took the shots in
Sure
order.
did.
Your dad's job required it.
That's right.
They
And
have
see,
the right to do that.
yeah, and see, the thing of it is, I've still got my immunization record of all of those years, and every 3 months we had to have a cholera shot. I think every year we had to have something else. Every 5 years was a yellow fever shot, and it went on and on and on. That was it, and you know it was going to hurt, but you know that it would be over with, and that you would not get some of the diseases,
Well,
such as in India or Sri Lanka, it was called Ceylon then,
mhm.
or other countries.
Well, Nancy, the chances are, just the chances are, that if Saudi Arabia oil company, Aramco, had
Mhm.
not required these shots, you might not be here today,
Well, that's right.
and your daughter would never have been born.
That-
You and I would never have had
No.
43 years of marriage.
No.
So think about this, folks. Uh, you're worried about somebody infringing on your rights. All of society is structured.
Uh-huh.
You have to have a license to drive an automobile legally. In order for you to use that vehicle on the streets, it has to be licensed legally. There are, if you're going to be married and in contract with one another, it is not just a spiritual thing, but it's a legal thing. If you have a will or a trust, it is registered at the county recorder of deeds. It's a legal thing. You can't just walk in someplace and walk out with goods unless you are a part of some of these new cancel culture movements in cities where they have defunded the police. They're allowed, they're doing it, but it's not legal. In other words, what I'm saying is society is structured, and some things are priced according to government regulations. Some things, their purity is determined by government regulations.
Mhm.
We are a regulated people. So why are you having this great outcry about somebody infringing on your rights to say you have to be vaccinated to work here or whatever?
Mhm.
That's getting into an area that we don't have time to deal with here. But I can tell you this: Smallpox has been contained. Polio has been contained. Diphtheria has been contained. Whooping cough has been contained. Many things have been contained
Yeah.
because of science and because they pushed it and said, get covered physically with this. All right. Now, I didn't mean to get way off on that, but it's not just the elderly that are faced with COVID-19. Now it's basically every age group. Now, let's talk now about senior citizens again, more specifically. Just this morning, I did some research and discovered that there are elderly victims of violent crime, and that has always been, but now it's on the increase. We've had, because of defund the police movement and other ideas about this social change and cancel culture, and I know, listen, the liberals don't want us to talk about this. The conservatives want us to get radical about it. I'm not going to get radical about it. I'm going to report the facts. The facts are that all of a sudden, certain classes of criminals have been emboldened, and they have beat up older women on the streets in broad daylight in cities. And but that's not the only kind of crime. We now have basically cyber crime directed towards senior citizens on the internet and over these smartphones and landlines of people calling. And many senior citizens are being taken advantage of financially. And the elderly, if we're not protective of them, they can be wiped out financially, totally. So there's violent crime. For some reason, Nancy, I feel led to go back to this thing I touched on a while ago about inflation and how that leads us into our food supply. No matter what people do, it's still supply and demand sets the prices. And we have cattle operators in North Dakota who've been selling off their herds because of the drought. They can't afford to feed them. The western third of the United States is drought-stricken, and it produces a lot of our fruits and vegetables. So it's not just California that's in a state of drought, which is it's 100% drought, but record high temperatures in the Pacific Northwest and other parts along the West Coast. They've had prolonged drought and these record high temperatures, even in the upper Midwest. Livestock and crops are stressed and raising concerns about irrigation supplies. There was a concern just this morning that I researched that California could run out of water quickly, very soon, and that we're looking at 27 million people. What are we going to do?
Well, when we were in Arabia, they had desalinization plants where you desalted. And that's
desalination plants.
Yes.
Well, they may have to do something like that for California.
Yeah.
The U.S. Drought Monitor, as of July the 13th, not that long ago, it's 13 days ago, showed 100% of all states west of the Rocky Mountains and most of the upper Midwest region in some level of drought. California, Oregon, Arizona, Idaho, Utah, and North Dakota were nearly 100% drought stricken or worse, with extreme and exceptional being the most severe. Washington, the state of Washington, Montana, South Dakota, Minnesota, New Mexico, most of Wyoming, and western Colorado all were in moderate stages or worse concerning drought. 2020 was a bad year. But at this time last year, only about 20% of the West was experiencing severe drought. Today, that number is up to nearly 80%, from 20% last year to 80% this year, including North and South Dakota. Severe drought. That percentage is even more staggering when compared to the 20% of the region that fell into the severe drought range this time last year. This writer says, this lawyer said, let that number sink in for a moment. This is a historic disaster of epic proportions, and it started to have a dramatic impact on agricultural production, and that, of course, affects prices. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's initial spring wheat, other than durum production forecast for 2020, was 344,575,000 bushels, down 41%. Down. What's that going to do to the price of bread?
Mm-hmm.
Remember, in the book of the Revelation in the Bible, the last book of the Bible, it says there'll come a time when it'll take a week's wages to buy a loaf of bread. And that's down 41%, that the estimate of bushels from 2020. The average yield was forecast at 30.7 bushels an acre. That's down 37% from 2020, and it's the lowest since 2002. Wheat production is way down. Although 2021 spring wheat planted area was down 5.5% from 2020, harvested area was down 7%, suggesting a larger number of abandoned acres. In other words, they're not even bothering to plant.
Mm-hmm.
Other crops are being hit even harder. U.S. oat crop will be the smallest that we've seen since records were being kept in 1866.
Whoa.
What's that going to do to the price of your Cheerios?
Yeah.
What's that going to do to the cost of oatmeal?
Yeah.
For thousands upon thousands of U.S. farmers, 2021 is going to be an absolutely disastrous year with very little production at all. At one farm in Minnesota, the owner is estimating that from the 2,500 acres of corn that he planted, it's be 75% less than last year. So these farmers, many of them, borrow money from banks to operate, get the crop out, and they get the crop in, and then when they get the crop in, they sell it, then they pay the bank back. They're running on borrowed money. They run on bank money. They're not running on family reserves, and even the big corporate farms, they're not running on corporate reserves. They're running on borrowed money.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a pastor in St. Joseph many years ago, I had a friend who owned an apple orchard, owned two of them, in fact, and a peach orchard. He borrowed money, even back then, we're talking the early 60s, to operate for a year to get the apple crop and the peach crop in, and when they were processed and sold, then he paid the bank back. If you have a bad year, then you 1 year deeper in debt.
Mm-hmm.
After a while, like way back in the late 20s, early 30s, there was a man who had a hole-in-the-wall hardware store in a small county seat town of 1,500 people. He was had enough cash flow that farmers who were experiencing disaster back in those Depression days, he would loan them a little bit of cash, and then he ended up with their farms. He ended up becoming wealthy at the expense of others. And then his son took over and started a company that provided a needed service at that time, even in cities. Propane fuel was a new deal. And he rode that to a multi-million-dollar operation. And when natural gas started being more plentiful in urban areas, then he sold out of the propane business and started back where his dad started. He had a hardware store. Now there are hundreds of those hardware stores across the United States, and his family, his heirs, are multi-millionaires. So this is the way things switch and change. And what I'm saying to you is this: the drought is real. The COVID-19 is real. These challenges are real to our health. The noise is real. All of this is real.
Well, how do you make it?
Yeah, now the question is, how do we make it in these times? Well, you and I, as people of faith, we unabashedly let you know that we happen to be people who are Christian. Now, there are those of you who may be of a different religion, but Nancy and I are people of faith. Therefore, that's our first go-to position to make it with inflation affecting groceries and gasoline and property taxes and everything that happens when you're on a fixed income and you can't grow your income, but you have to learn how to live within these new boundaries. Our first stop is faith, our personal faith as followers of Jesus. Now, the other step that we take, and everybody should take, is to reevaluate where's your money going? What are you spending money on? Because chances are very good that you are spending money on unnecessary items. And if you now do away with the unnecessary and watch what you're doing with the good investment counsel, then you will have another hedge against inflation. There's a whole lot we can say about this. We're out of time. But I just suggest people contact us either through axmediagroup.com or drpaulcollins.com, and we will shed more light on noise, strokes, hearing loss, Alzheimer's. Our guest next week, Dr. Jamie Durfee, MD, and more information about the drought and about cost of living, about inflation, and how to make it. Anyway, we'll look forward to hearing from you. And until we do talk to you next week at the same time, this is Paul and Nancy saying, stay blessed.